Hey everyone, welcome to Masonzero MTG. This is the first time that I've felt a Magic set doesn't really feel like Magic. And yet, it's been a pretty fun limited environment so far in my testing, and there are some cool cards to play with. However, when it comes to Cube, I found that there aren't many all-star picks here. I think there are certainly a lot of cool cards that could find their way into some more specific cubes, and those people are probably quite happy, but there are very few auto-includes or generically relevant cards. But despite that, let's go take a look at some of my favorites as well as the ones that people have been talking about online. And if you enjoy Cube content, don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more. The Verge Cycle. Alright, let's get this one out of the way. It's an easy one. The Verge Cycle from Duskmourn was finished in Aetherdrift, and these are really good dual lands. I would say they are one of the most ideal dual land cycles if you're not running fetches and shocks, since they always come in untapped, and it's very easy to gain access to both colors that they produce. So yeah, pretty easy inclusion. Marauding Mako and Scrounging Skyray. So if you have a cube with cycling or discard in it, there are quite a few cards from Aetherdrift that you may want to try. Two of the most basic and impactful ones are Marauding Mako and Scrounging Skyray, which I consider to be the same kind of card, so I'm including them together. Both cards have the same triggered ability, which is when you discard one or more cards, you put that many +1/+1 counters on this creature. Both also have cycling themselves for 2 mana. The red one is an aggressive 1-drop, and the blue one is a 2-drop with flying. With cards like Faithless Looting and Charter Course in your cube, you'll have no problem making these cards worth their mana cost and more. And having cycling themselves makes them far from dead in the late game if you no longer need them. Spectacular Pile-Up. There are no shortage of 5-mana board wipes that are Day of Judgment with a random upside. And to be honest, you're probably only running Day of Judgment and or Wrath of God as your white board wipes, maybe Sunfall if you really are running a 5-mana option, but Spectacular Pile-Up promises to be a decent alternative that might be worth playing. It destroys all creatures and vehicles, but first it removes Indestructible from them. It also has cycling for 2, which is one of the most attractive features. Other board wipes with cycling include, well, Ochroma's Vengeance, and that's it for white, so that's pretty cool. The removal of Indestructible and the ability to hit vehicles are interesting and may occasionally feel good, but I imagine most people would rather just use a 4-mana board wipe. I think the only vehicles that really see play are Essica's Chariot and Smuggler's Copter, maybe Shorikai, and there aren't really any indestructible creatures that see significant play, so I'm not sure how useful that extra text is, but maybe in your cube it will be. Grim Bauble. Grim Bauble is a simple common artifact, but people are talking about it for cube and beyond. For 1 black mana, you get an artifact that gives a creature -2/-2 when it enters, then you can pay 3 and sack it to Surveil 2. So on the surface, it's a sorcery speed Disfigure or Stab, which can later be cashed in for some card filtering. I think it's worth trying out if you do run Disfigure or something similar, but it's certainly not the craziest card ever. Obviously it does get better with artifact synergy though. Bright Glass Gearhulk. The new cycle of Gearhulks are cool, but none of them are particularly cube-worthy. Bright Glass Gearhulk, or Bright Ass Gearhulk as some people have been calling it, is probably the most appealing, but that's really only because the green-white slots in cube aren't super amazing as it is. This one demands 2 green and 2 white to cast, so it's pretty restrictive. But if you do cast it, it's a 4/4 with First Strike and Trample, and it has an Enters effect where you can search your library for 2 artifacts, creatures, or enchantments that have mana value 1 or less. So sure, you can tutor for your Mox, or your aggro creatures, or your critical aura. It definitely has similar vibes to Ranger of Eos, but can hit more card types while also having a much more restrictive mana cost. I don't know, it's interesting. Grease Wrench Goblin. Welcome another red 1-drop to the list of considerations for your red aggro slots. Grease Wrench Goblin is a 2-mana 2/1, but it has no inherent abilities. That is, until you activate its 1-time exhaust ability. This costs 3 and you discard any number of cards to draw that many cards, and you put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. I don't really think this is better than any other red 1-drops that you could be playing, although maybe if you're playing Kellen from Foundations, I think this might be more likely to provide value. Although I do dislike that it just replaces the amount you discard rather than being able to replace an empty hand, such as with a card like Bedlam Reveler. Overall, this is an interesting card, but as a 1-mana 2/1, I don't think it really makes the cut for a lot of cubes. So those are my top 5, or 6 I guess if you count the Verges, But I'm going to talk about 5 more cards in a bit of a speed round, since I don't see too much point in talking about them at length, but I think they're worth considering regardless. Fuel the Flames is an instant speed 2 damage to each creature for 3 mana, of which there are already a few variants, but this one has Cycling, which makes you feel better when you're playing it against control or something. Quake Feast is a 2 mana kill spell that can hit a creature, planeswalker, or vehicle, but is held back by being sorcery speed and is dependent on having the ability to fill your graveyard. Maybe an alternative to Baleful Mastery or Bitter Triumph, but it's a side grade for sure, maybe a downgrade, that all really depends on the contents of your cube. Broadside Barrage costs 3 mana, one of which is blue and one of which is red, to deal 5 to a creature or a planeswalker, and then you draw and discard. It's a simple design in 2025, who knew it was possible? Comparable to Prismari Command and Electrolyze in terms of what it sets out to do, but not necessarily better or worse than those cards, just different. It really depends on what you want out of that slot. Intimidation Tactics is a 1 mana discard spell that lets you take an artifact or creature from your opponent's hand and exile it. It also has Cycling for 3. It may be a reasonable swap for Dreams of Steel and Oil if you play that, but it's definitely not better than most of the popular discard spells like Thoughtseize or Inquisition of Kozilek. Cycling is good though, even if it is Cycling 3, because this is likely to be a dead draw if you get it late in the game, against certain decks of course. Dredger's Insight. Dredger's Insight is an enchantment with an Enter's ability to mill 4 and get back an artifact, creature, or land from among them to your hand, and it has a static ability that whenever an artifact or creature leaves your graveyard, you gain a life. So under most circumstances, this is a 2 mana sorcery that gets a card and gains 1 life, and I'd compare it to something like Winding Way. Winding Way has a higher ceiling but a lower floor, but I think I slightly prefer Dredger's Insight actually, especially if you have other effects that can trigger its ability. So those are the cards I think are worth considering for Cube from Aetherdrift. Nothing that's a windmill slam inclusion in the average cube, but some pretty fun cards nonetheless. Let me know in the comments if any of the cards in this set excite you for Cube, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't, because we're getting ever closer to 1,000 subs. This has been Masonzero MTG, and I will see you in the next video.